started, we want to thank everyone for taking time out of your evening. For some of you, maybe sitting in yet the 10th Zoom meeting of your day. We know how difficult that is, but we're glad you're here, and we hope that we can offer some helpful information to you this evening. My name is Michelle Ritter, and I'm a member of the Mercer Island Parent Edge. And for those of you who don't know, Parent Edge is an organization within the Mercer Island PTA Council, and we provide programs to help support our parents and students and educators on a variety of topics. And we are offering this program tonight in partnership with Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. We have a great program, and this is the second in our parent support series. We previously had a program that was offered to our elementary students or parents of elementary students. And we have one tomorrow night for parents of younger students, so preschool to first grade. Parent Edge is made up of parent volunteers, and we want to thank all those who helped make this program possible this evening. And if anyone's interested in learning more, we're always looking for new members to join us. And we're offering this program tonight really as a way to support parents and families during this really difficult time. As a group, we were all talking about how some students, especially our tweens and teens, are doing okay with the remote schooling, and some not so much. And I think we all have our moments of challenges, and we've all seen some silver linings, but overall, we all just need a little more support during this time. And we've got some great advice from our experts of panelists. And so I wanted to go ahead and introduce our panelists this evening. We have Harry Brown, who is a MIYFS counselor at Islander Middle School. We have Chris Harnish, who is the Mercer Island Youth and Family Services counselor at the high school. And we also have Julie Wood, who is a child and adult psychoanalyst and family therapist practicing in Bellevue. And they've all worked closely together in the past, so they have some great information. And also joining us is Derek Franklin, who's with Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. And Derek can offer some perspective as well on just general things that are happening on the island and within the city, and also on the counseling side. Tonight's format, we are going to have some information that the panelists will share. We've coordinated a few themes that we think are kind of top of mind for everyone. And then we'll also leave you with some tangible tips for how you can take all this information and use it practically at home with your children. And then we'll also have a Q&A that you can ask us questions, and hopefully we can help with some of those answers. We do ask, if you have a question, please share it in the chat down below. If you don't want to share it with the whole group, if it's something you want to be anonymous, you can certainly send it directly to me in the chat. I'm under Parent Edge, Michelle Ritter, and you can send it to me and I can share that anonymously with our panelists. I will also be joined by one of our Parent Edge colleagues, Lori Cohn-Sanford, will be here to help with the Q&A, so you may see her on screen as well. And we are recording tonight's webinar, so for those of you who want to share it with another family member or caregiver or a friend that you think could benefit from the information, we will have that recording and we'll send it out via email. We'll also send out all of the slides and the resources, because there is a lot of really, really great information here. And so I'm going to turn it over, because I know everyone is looking for some great information. And so I'm going to turn it over to Harry.
Awesome, I will. Michelle, if you could stop sharing your screen and I'll put mine.
There you go.
Terrific, thank you. Zoom transition. We've done it. So taking a look at the title here, one, I'm just excited that all of you are here, and really that I'm able and we're able to share this information with you. What we're going to be starting with in our presentation today is information that I received as part of a healthcare authority working subgroup, Children's Behavioral Health and Suicide Prevention. Last week, we had a presentation from a psychologist who specializes in disaster impact on mental health for adults and children. She shared information from a Department of Health program that they've put together, a great resource for families and professionals. And we're going to be sharing information from the family booklet, and you'll be able to get access to that. We'll have that link at the end of the PowerPoint, and you'll be able to get it. And that's where all this information is coming from. And I added this piece to the title, Supporting Our Tweens and Teens Through challenges of social isolation and a global pandemic. Because I think we need to take the context that we're dealing with something, we're all aware of it, but maybe not as conscious of it and how it's affecting our children. And that's really what we want to take a look at, not only how it's impacting them, but how you can respond to it. So if we take a look, they've put together in this a timeline, and we can take a look at where we're at. And there's an overall graph I wasn't able to catch, and they show how initially there's this kind of heroic phase. If you take a look at disasters, and we come together and there's this coalescing, and then the graph goes way down in terms of everybody's functional mental health. And right now we're maybe starting to come out of the disillusionment phase, which is really one of the toughest periods when we're 9 months post outbreak or so, maybe even more. And I want us to think, though, this ends at 12 months, but the lingering effects of this may go on for 18 months or longer in terms of the impact on all of us, and especially our children. Fortunately, they're more resilient than adults typically, but this is going to take some time. So you can take a look at the emotional effects, initially anxiety and grief, and progressing this 9 month out, anxiety, depression, increased risk of suicide. And a month ago, working professionals received an advisory from our health department in King County, citing the concerns of 4 losses of youth to suicide. And so there's increased risk for suicide. And I want to thank so much Chris's work at the high school in getting the information on Learn out there to parents and knowing how to respond if you do have concerns. And we can certainly support you with that today if there's some general questions about that. But you can see the progression of emotional responses. And maybe you're wondering, why is my kid acting like this, right? And you can see that it's really taken all of the things that are part of all of our characters and exacerbating them and turning up the volume, especially on behaviors that can be challenging for children. And cognitive functioning, and we see this at the middle school. Some kids are doing great, and maybe we'll spend some time talking about what builds resiliency. And there's some things I can see in some of our youth who are getting through this for different reasons, and other kids are really struggling. But there's a reason for that, right? There's this layer of trauma that we're all experiencing, and you can see how it starts to affect them over time. Uh, Confusion with problems, attention and concentration problems. I've had more parents ask me for assessments and how to go through that process for inattentive ADD than I've ever had. And I think it's because of this layer of the pandemic and this disaster over all of us that it's very difficult for kids to struggle to focus. And I think it's difficult for us to maintain structure. And that's another thing we'll be talking about. But 9 months out, decreased interest and involvement in learning, and difficulty in just completing basic tasks. And many of you may be seeing that in your children, and it should not be a surprise. And it doesn't mean they necessarily have some sort of mental health disorder, but it may really be in response to the pandemic itself and what's going on in their environment. And then thinking about post outbreak, thinking about what kind of skill deficits, what kind of academic failures, what kind of things are going on, and how do we support kids in getting through this, coming out the other side, and realizing too, if there are significant problems, get support for that. And then looking at behavioral concerns, and I've had several calls with parents seeing this acting out, and they talk about, Dr. Mouth talked about acting out and acting in. Maybe some of us think about that, internalizing versus externalizing behaviors. But we're seeing a lot, parents are seeing a lot of acting out behaviors, maybe that they hadn't seen before. And the kind of tantruming, maybe they hadn't seen in years, especially in, I've heard about this quite a bit in 6th graders struggling. So that acting out or withdrawal, Chris can talk about potential substance abuse disorders being increased, but that sense we really want to keep an eye out and an ear out, to be great listeners as adults for any sense of hopelessness, seeing that lack of planning for future frustration, and how we can hear and support our young people as they go through this challenging time. And Chris, you're going to talk about these?
Yeah, so young people are impacted by an event like a COVID or other kinds of trauma related. The responses run along a continuum, and Harry mentioned there's, on the one end, the extreme is the acting out, and these are the big behaviors that you would see. kids that are taking risks that are out of the norm for them. They might be pushing the envelope when it comes to legality, breaking house rules. They might be experimenting with drugs and alcohol. Could be more defiance, more talking back on that end of the continuum. And as you move towards the acting in, that's where kids are withdrawing. They're becoming more wanting to be alone, spending more time in their room. They seem quieter. They're not showing the emotion. We call it stuffing, but keeping it down, keeping it inside. Expressions may seem flat. They may seem less active as far as things that were, physical activities that they were engaged in. So it runs along that continuum in varying degrees. For teens, there's been, as for adults, a lot of uncertainty, and their world has been turned upside down. I know, talking with high school students, all the traditions, the things that they look forward to, the routines, they aren't there this year. And a lot of kids are struggling with that. The going to class, going to lunch, the homecomings, the dances, the clubs, the sports, the extracurriculars just aren't there. And young people are really floundering to kind of figure out what that's all about. And how long is that going to last? The other thing that can contribute to this change in behavior, I think, is that we're all stuck together in our homes. And so we're not getting that respite of 6 or 8 hours out of the house at work or at school. And so it can magnify pre-existing issues that are going on, both for young people, for relationships, or for parent-related issues or family-related issues. But it runs along that continuum, and it just kind of depends on your young person and how they're responding to that. I saw a national statistic that teens seeking mental health services at the emergency rooms are up 28% from this time last year. So I think that's indicative of what's going on out there. A lot of young people are struggling.
And I think in this one, we can see changes in mood, this sense of uncertainty, worried for safety of loved ones, cranky, worried that the disaster will happen again. I mean, these almost sound like symptoms of some sort of separation anxiety, right? Things that you'd see in kids that are highly anxious, but it's been brought on by this environmental stressor that we're all dealing with. Too agitated, too hyper. I'll see kids on Zoom calls and classes that just, they're so activated, and they are normally somewhat activated, but just struggling to calm themselves down. And it really points to what we'll be talking about in a few minutes, of how we can support people in managing this experience and managing these emotional extremes that they might be feeling. Anger, sad, fearful. And I think when we see a lot of anger from young people, and I've had a couple conversations with parents about the anger they're seeing in their children, another thing that Dr. MIYFS talked about was that anger is so closely tied to fear. And there's this underlying fear and this underlying uncertainty that we can't necessarily give answers to, but we can definitely highlight the security and the stability that we have, right? We know what we have, and that we can look around and reassure our youth that we can get through this. Yes, it's difficult, but we can get through it, and we're not going anywhere. We're here and we're available for you. And we can do that as, kind of next people out from that inner circle of your family. But how do you do that within the family? And we'll be talking about that. So changes in thinking, you might see trouble concentrating, difficulty with new tasks, false belief, maybe somehow it's their fault, especially with younger kids, kind of that magical thinking, or somehow they're part of this. And that loss of trust that you can protect them. And there is some reality. Some things are beyond any of our control, but what can we control? And that's what we'll be looking at.
I'm hearing from high school age students a lot of frustration, I think, would be probably the best way to sum it up. And the sense that they're missing out, that FOMO, but it's like their senior experience or their freshman experience. They haven't been in the building yet. And that frustration can manifest itself in that angry, being sad, being withdrawn. But that's probably one of the more common as we move farther into the pandemic and it continues to linger with the different restrictions. It's frustration and anger that I'm seeing from young people, probably the most common. And that's adolescence, right? They live in the moment. They're very social. You got that underdeveloped frontal lobe, and you want things to be happening, and everything's been put on pause for the last 10 months. So
Yeah,
that's what we're
and
seeing.
that really makes me think of the dialectic of being able to hold on to this is really difficult, but it's going to change. And we need to acknowledge how difficult it is for them. And at the same time, recognize there's this light at the end of the tunnel that we're going towards.
Mhm.
Julie, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So let's talk about some of the impact on kids and teens of the pandemic on education and learning. It can be really difficult to continue paying attention when you're being educated remotely and you don't have the whole kind of your body in the space, direct contact with your friends, your teachers, your support systems at school. So just hanging on and attending is going to be a challenge under the remote learning circumstances. The other thing is that in the absence of all those other cues, all those things that help us remember things, where we were, what we were wearing, what our mood was, how we felt, who was on the periphery, that contributes to difficulty in remembering in general. And I'm hearing from both my teens and adults that they feel like their memories are foggy, like they've had some memory impairment, but it's because we're lacking all of the other cues that help encode memory in our brain.
COVID brain, I've heard it referred to.
COVID brain, that's what I call it. Every time I forget something, I was like, well, COVID brain. I forgot my reading glasses one day. That's like never happened. So for people who are in educational settings, so our youth and young adults, it is particularly hard to remember things when that's so much of the focus of education, when all of the contextual cues are missing. And that includes forgetting to complete tasks. So I'm hearing from middle schoolers and high schoolers, from parents that they can go on to whatever their platform is for assignments, and there's one assignment after another that's missing from kids who didn't typically have that difficulty. The only thing they're relying on is something that's two-dimensional as opposed to the richness of their full experience. The other thing that can happen is in the absence of being out and active, which is so important for kids and teens, they're just fidgety. They have too much energy. They might regress and act sillier or younger than you've seen them. You might have this sense of like, wow, what happened to my growing, maturing teen when they regress to something that looks a lot younger, a lot sillier. And there's no place to play all that out. That's where traditionally kids are out playing it on band, they're out playing it in sports, they're out expending all that energy socially. But when you're cooped up at home, and even if you're in a little quarantine bubble with one or two of your friends, it's not the same dynamic as the big group dynamics that teens are so wired to participate in. Feeling really tired all the time, while that might look like some typical teen behavior, there is a legitimate source of fatigue, which is that when we are on Zoom, our brains are trying to tackle the asynchrony of sensory, of sight, sound, and how we're putting that all together. And while it may look like we're live, there's actually a tremendous lag time. And so there's been some research done that people misattribute emotional state because they're not reading facial cues the same way that they are when they're in person. That a sense of, oh, you're not interested in me, you're not paying attention, is pervasive when you're connected with somebody via the screen. And you can imagine if you're having that experience, how you might feel disengaged, tired, lethargic, not interested. Sleep and appetite disturbances, there's so many factors that play into that. Right now, part of what everybody's missing, kids, youth, and adults, is typical routines, the norms of getting up, going to school, going to work, going to your activities, all your extracurriculars, coming home, having dinner. The rhythm of daily life has been out of whack now for a really long time. And that's going to contribute to shifts in sleep and appetite. And some people are more sensitive than others to being on screens, and that can also contribute to sleep and appetite differences. again, you're in a two-dimensional world, and the blue light from screens impacts how our brains tell us that we're tired or that we're not tired and that it's time to be active. So you've all probably seen the advice of no screen time an hour before bedtime, but when your entire world is happening on screen, that can be a big ask, particularly for high schoolers who are potentially up late doing homework. Headaches and stomach aches are communications. When any of us, kids, teens, adults, have headaches and stomach aches, that might be a way of our body saying something's not right. And so beyond what might be physically causing them, be tuned in to how is your kid maybe trying to communicate to you, things just aren't right. I'm not feeling at home in my skin. I'm not feeling at home in my world. And the best way I have to communicate that is by telling you a part of me hurts. The other thing is the literal difference of, again, being on screens, our eyes being tired, our brains being fatigued, literally contributing to headaches. As Harry and Chris already talked about, changes in mood, anxiety, feeling cranky, having outbursts, being weepy, all common responses when any of us are stressed, particularly under an external stressor. And for kids who already struggle with impulsivity, again, they're missing the cues from everything around them, the people around them, their friends, teachers, their parents, their supports, in the different rhythm. And so being able to pause and think before speaking and taking action has a different layer of complexity and a different layer of difficulty.
I mean, it's almost like a kid's playing a big giant video game.
Mm-hmm.
And that the cues aren't there. And I know freshmen, I have some freshmen that are struggling to kind of figure out what is the high school way, because they don't have any barometer for that. It's all on, as you say, a two-dimensional kind of experience.
The other group of kids that I think sometimes we're not talking about are all the kids that are starting at a new school this year. I happen to be working with a couple of families where that's the case, and those kids are suffering because not only are they not getting the full experience, but they don't know anybody. And it's really hard to make a friend no matter how talented the teacher is at pairing up kids. And as you're saying, Chris, they're not getting that culture feel, the vibe of okay, how do we do this? Like, you know, okay, maybe I moved from a different high school, now I'm at Mercer Island, like what's the vibe here? Or kids who've moved from private to public or public to private, you know, what's the vibe here compared to what I know? And not having a way to really immerse yourself. Those are the things that we pick up sort of just by osmosis.
Yeah, and
I never thought I'd miss the large group of freshmen blocking the hallways. Because they always are kind of this herd mentality in ninth grade. We don't have that on Zoom.
Well, you know, that does make me think, and it's not listed here, but the sense of loss we all feel.
Yeah.
And not being in the building, not being together. I miss seeing kids practicing CPR in the hall and tripping over them, that kind of thing. But I do want parents to know, if you are new to the district and you are trying to figure out how to connect your child, we offer a variety of groups that are going on during lunches. And I just had a new student join a lunch group I do on Mondays. And there are several different opportunities, including facilitating Zoom calls between youth who are interested in connecting with students who are new. So there are things we can be creative. We're trying to innovate. We're working on pivoting to meet these needs and connect with one of us on our counseling teams, and we can see how we can support you in helping your youth feel like they are connected and are part of something, no matter how remote we are.
Okay, let's talk about priorities. So when your child is acting in, more introverted, withdrawn, quiet, sad, sullen, or acting out, letting you know in no uncertain terms by their pushing the boundaries, yelling, enraged, stomping around, that we need to pay attention to these as communication. They're letting us know that this kid is feeling alone, is symptoms of regression. And we all experience regression, but for kids, you know, they may look younger than they were. So paying attention to that. And there's a couple of reasons. It's not just so that your kid's behaving better in school or better in the family. It's because it's really hard on a kid themselves to be experiencing all these symptoms, and changes how they feel about themselves. And it changes how their friends feel about them. So it has this ripple effect beyond being perhaps difficult for the adults in the family or in the school to be managing. The other priority is to attend to education deficits as they show up. What we know is that there are a group of kids who are going to have some real lingering deficits that we'll need to address as we return to more normal education. But I also want to include here that there are some kids who are going to appear to have education deficits, and they're not. They're going to catch right up. There's also a group of kids where they're not going to be impacted. That this stage of development is really important, and it has formative impact for later on. But the really critical periods for development are actually in early childhood. And so most of what a typically developing child is going to be learning academically in middle and high school, they can catch up with. And I know that this is really worrisome for parents, and particularly thinking about parents of the older high schoolers who are looking at college and testing and how is this going to show up. But more than likely, a lot of what kids are missing academically right now, they will catch up. Probably the most important thing that families can help with is how to maintain structure and support. While it may seem small, kids and teens, more than they would ever tell us, really rely on family time, family dinners, contacts with extended family members that they're used to, contacts with not just their friends, but those people that are other adults in their lives, family, friends, aunts, uncles. So as much as possible, helping create around your family and around your kids this sense of we're carrying on. It can be hard to keep that going when you've got every member of the family at home and everybody's on a screen, either at school or at work. So this is not by any means easy, but it's worth striving for. And I think maybe even reassuring yourself as parents that family dinner is useful. What I'm hearing from some of my families in my practice is, and this is the silver lining part, I think that Michelle mentions, is for the first time in a long time, maybe since their kids were little, with their bigger kids, their middle and high schoolers, they're having pizza nights again. They're having movie nights. They're doing game nights. During as ski season comes upon us, one of the few activities that has been set up to be safe, parents and kids are going to ski again, as opposed to sending kids off with their peers. So there are some opportunities, as in any trauma or disaster, to say, you've got a family, we're around you, and that will help. The other thing that's important to know if you're worried about your child's academics is that the capacity to learn and retain new information is significantly impacted by an emotional state. So when a person is highly anxious or in a low mood, it's literally more difficult to learn and retain. And that's why attending to someone's emotional health is so important as an academic concern. So if you're noticing that your kids are more anxious, more depressed, it's okay for you to let go of some of maybe your expectations of how they would do academically if we were in a regular educational setting. We're not in a regular setting. And again, most of the academics will be caught up, but it will be really hard in this stage to be learning and retaining if you're anxious and depressed. And that goes for parents as well. It's hard to keep on top of everything when you're also managing your own anxiety and mood about what's happening and all the changes in your own life.
Julie, I just wanted,
yeah.
This is Michelle. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for pointing that out, because I think through all of this, parents have been managing our own anxiety as well, and this feeling of, how will my kid ever recover? And I think we are in a community where there's a lot of pressure on academically. And I think to hear that, to know that our kids are going to be okay. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I read a quote and it said, my goal in all of this is to come out, for my family to come out mentally intact.
I like that.
our mental health to be intact,
Uh-huh.
because we're not going to win awards. We're not going to do the best of best, but to come
Yeah.
out mentally whole. And I think it's hard for a lot of us to put that academic aside. And I
Mhm.
had shared with the group, one thing that I have had to do with a struggling child is to ask the teacher, like, what is the minimum that my child needs to do
Mhm.
to get through this? And just knowing that my child can do this and still progress was such a relief for all of us, rather than trying to say we need to do it all and we need to do it perfectly and we need so I just wanted to thank you for pointing that out, because I think that is reassuring for parents to hear. So
Oh, I'm so glad. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the resiliency of young people, I mean, it keeps me going. That's why I'm in the field.
Mhm.
With a little assistance, a little support, a little grace, kids can really bounce back and come
Mhm.
out on the other side okay.
And part of that resilience is this is a time to learn new skills. So if you feel as a parent like, okay, maybe you weren't the best at helping teach your kids calming and regulation, now's the time. And the most powerful way is when we do that for ourselves. So whatever it does that works for you, whether it's getting out for a walk or doing one of the few social activities that you can do, like skiing, like swimming, yoga, being able to use online resources. And when we do that, we can say to our kids, this is what I'm doing. You know, this is a crazy time and this is how I'm keeping my head together. There's also, and I think Carrie has them at the end, some resources for meditation and mindfulness. And I know that within the schools, there's been a lot of mindfulness training. And this is a great time to practice that. And if you don't know about that, just go look it up. You guys can learn together, particularly with adolescents. They would be thrilled to teach you something. I had a freshman from Mercer Island tell me today, oh, I am going to have to teach you about this because you obviously don't know how to connect with the popular kids. Right? So if you want to learn something, it's a really great resource to use your adolescent to teach you something. You can learn it together.
Apps that I have, Julie, as resources, and some of them are actually on, our middle schoolers have access to them on their iPads.
Oh, good.
And you could do the My Life. It used to be Stop, Breathe, Think, My Life. You could do that and do that. It starts with a physical check-in, an emotional check-in. What feelings do I have? And you could track your feelings over weeks, and then practice doing some of these very simple breathing exercises, meditation exercise. And I'm always telling parents, I appreciate what you're saying. Our children are watching what we do. They're not hearing everything we say, but they certainly watch what we do. And if we can model for them how we handle our own distress, not that we're not going to get upset and frustrated, but how do we manage that? How do we bring ourselves back to calm, not flip our lids, or if we do flip our lids, make a repair, right? And get back to calm, and then do the problem solving that we need to do and move forward. So, but those are available, and we'll share those with people.
Oh, good. Great.
I'll just put my drug alcohol counselor hat on for a minute for number 7. You know, in April and May, we saw state of Washington alcohol and marijuana sales jumped up dramatically. And I think that self-medicating on some level, some of the anxiety, the uncertainty, some of the fears might be tapped down. People are utilizing substances, and your kids are watching that. And I think it's that talking about that self-care, modeling healthier ways to manage, and looking for other alternatives, maybe than a glass or 3 of wine when you're feeling that way, is a healthy role modeling for young people.
The other part about learning together about regulation, coping, is it helps kids face things head on. And this in number 6, this is really what some people even talk about as post-traumatic growth, is what can happen in the midst of extraordinarily difficult times, disasters, traumatic events, that leads to stronger character, a stronger sense of self. And at the heart of it is always facing what's happening. So facing that this is a really bizarre, unusual, once in 100 years, for all of us, it's a major historical event. And facing how it impacts day-to-day life. It's okay to commiserate with your kids about how crappy this is sometimes. And if they're telling you how crappy it is, don't cheer them up, commiserate, jump right in there. Let them know it's not great for you either. When we face things, we can master them. If we don't face them, we can't master them. And so what often comes out of disasters and trauma with young people and adults is a greater capacity to face the reality of something, the fear and the anxiety, and to master it. This is not the time for coddling or for anxious avoidance and stuffing, as Chris said. Go ahead, face it with your kids, and together sort out what might be useful.
My coworker Ariel likes to say, lean into it.
Yeah, it's a perfect phrase.
So we're gonna pivot a bit from our concerns to think about what can we do about it, and how are we going to help teens heal and grow from this experience. And I have to give credit to PowerPoint design, because it really highlighted these words that we really love the ring to them, and this notion of increased recovery and healing. And that's really where we need to move into. And this idea of encouraging and educating and allowing our children is so essential. So encouraging our teens to express their thoughts and feelings by being an active listener. I was in a session the other day, and this young person was frustrated with something that had happened. And I really had to coach the parent not to try to fix it, because the parent did, we have I bet everybody on this call, are all amazing fixers, right? And now is the time to, in many instances, probably most, just to sit and listen and absorb it, and coach your child on how they can handle it, and go back to them and ask, what do you think would be a next step with this? And oftentimes it's just to be heard, and that may be really what they want. And you can even kind of step that forward by anticipating that, say, I promise I won't do anything until you and I talk about it, as long as it's not about their safety, right? To listen to that and just acknowledge, and not just, but to really acknowledge and to hear them. So many of our kids that I'm talking to do not feel the validation that I think they're craving right now. And it's not anybody's doing anything wrong. We're all going in so many different, everybody's juggling. And so maybe we just got to put some of those balls down now and then, and just hear what's going on, and practice our empathetic listening, and be there with them in this stew that we're in. Educating them, taking this information that we're talking about. You'll have this PowerPoint, and educate them. There's a reason you're having trouble concentrating and focusing. Look at this is what the State Department of Health has put out. Many people are experiencing that, and it's not going to stay like this. It will shift. And if it doesn't, we'll find a way to address that. But that we need to be honest and direct about what's going on.
Harry, I want to underline that point. We've made it a couple of times. I want to underscore that point of this will end.
Yeah.
There's some research on how we all respond to trauma, and that the most traumatic aspect of a trauma or a disaster is the idea that this state will never end.
Yeah.
And so that our minds think it's going to be like this forever. This awfulness will be forever, or this isolation will be forever. And this is especially important for adolescents who don't think long term. They're all right here. And so they're not thinking ahead. And a month to us is really different than a month to an adolescent. So going ahead and being overt about it's rough, acknowledge all the difficulties, and this will end.
I like the orientation towards the future. And so having those conversations about, hey, when you're back at school, or when you're able to hang out with your friends or participate in sports and activities, so that there is some positivity in and amongst all this yuck that we're stuck in right now.
I was going to share that there's an exercise on one of the other slides where you have your child write down what are the things they want to do when this is over. What do you see yourself doing? Here we are this year in school. What do you want next year to look like? And really that forward thinking, that coping ahead.
I know some families who've done that, all of the summer vacations and holiday celebrations that are missed, in what will essentially be a full year. Some families with kids of all different ages are sitting down and saying, okay, when this is over, what will we want to do? Where do we want to go? We thought we would camp sometime. Maybe next summer or the one after is the time to camp, but being able to think and plan together.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I took a road trip to Boston this year and actually drove to Boston, rented an RV, and that's nothing I ever thought I would do. But we have to let ourselves kind of think out of our normal constraints and what are the possibilities.
Mhm.
But to have those discussions with our children, what is it you'd like to see happen? I think really could open the door to really seeing there is a future, and planning towards that is a really concrete step that you can take. This last section here, allowing them to assist in supporting younger children and other community members. And I mean, those are kind of vague. At the same time, I have this student connection thing going where there's a student who volunteered to meet another student to help them. And there are different opportunities. We have our JUST group at school. We have our Sources of Strength group. Web is still there and active. There are a number of different ways that young people can get involved through school and in the community, youth groups, different organizations, and to feel like they have some agency. And that agency extends to your family. And I really think, Julie, I'm really a big believer in family meetings. A weekly family meeting. We used to do ours on Sunday.
Yep, Sunday night.
Sunday nights, what do we want to see happen? We can talk through things that didn't go so well, but we plan too. Hey, what are we going to have for dinner this week? And now more than ever, planning ahead so you don't have to go to the grocery store all the time, but thinking about what are we going to make? How can you engage? We have a PE teacher named Chuck Millsap, and he has a moment with Millsap. And today's moment with Millsap was how to make a healthy dip. And he gave, with his daughters in his kitchen, he had a video of how to make hummus, right? So that's something you can do and engage your kids in being community members of your family right now.
And this is so important in combating helplessness. So when Harry was looking at that timeline and the disillusionment and the discouragement as this drags on, to combat that sense of helplessness with a sense of agency. And I'm thinking about, there is the very tiny silver linings of being home all the time is that kids who are overcommitted in activities are now learning how to cook for the family. I can't tell you how many families where some of the teens are taking on home projects that they maybe had an inkling they'd be interested in, but they never had time between school and academics. And now they can. So I know one kid started up ceramics. Another kid started making family dinners at least once a week. Other families have taken on cooking projects, like, where you can sign up for a cooking class and they've learned how to make something together. So, and then of course, helping kids who can drive, help elderly neighbors or people who might be immune compromised and are more isolated than even most of us are.
I mean, what I'm hearing you say, it's about connections, really.
Connecting and contributing.
Yeah.
We do focus on how much loss there's been, but there's a lot of ways, particularly adolescents, can contribute.
Well, I think about the notion of inferiority versus industry, and our young people need to feel like they're contributing and doing something in the world and not having any impact and just floating aimlessly. So there are these things we can do to support them in that. These things on the right, this helping teens feel calm. So engaging with them in ways to reduce their stress. Maybe when you're feeling that stress, have everybody just sit for a minute and take a few breaths. And let's just calm it down together. And it may be learning some new things. We talked about this. We have these apps that you can go on to and use. And also thinking about how to be active. And I saw a study that one parent told me they had their child wear their Fitbit around the middle school last year, and they were walking almost a mile. Where is that? They're not walking. Our building is so spread out, Julie. We have 3 different buildings. So how to get them engaged in activity. And again, moments with Millsap. He's doing a lot of these exercises in his living room, and I don't never see him knock anything over, but he's inside, and there's really active workouts you can do in a way that can be done in your living room and still get kids that activity. I went onto a Zoom call for one of our health teachers, Karen Shops, and I'm going to present all this information on health. And we end up doing a lunge challenge and a squat. There are these videos called, I think, Go Sally Go or something, but All this stuff is available to us. And to build that into a child's day, to get that bilateral movement and to get them out of their chair. I try to get out of my chair, having the computer up higher maybe so they can stand and move also helps with taking in new information as well. So we're going to shift to taking a look at some pretty practical things you can do for as family, for yourself, and for our youth. I think we're doing pretty good on time. If we can get through those and open things up to Q&A, I think we're going to be in good shape. I don't know who wants to jump in on this one.
So it's having that routine, I think that we referenced earlier, but also being flexible around it. But having that routine helps to tap down that sense of feeling like you're out of control. And it's reassuring for everybody if you know what the day is going to look like. I think we were talking a little bit, Julie, about the creative ways to stay connected. I know for Thanksgiving, my sister's a former second grade teacher and librarian, and we played Zoom games. If you Google, there's a whole bunch of different type of games that you can play via Zoom with people that are in other parts of the city or other parts of the state. But it was really fun. I was kind of not looking forward to Thanksgiving this year, but we ended up really having fun, and I attributed that to my sister's creativity and reaching out to us.
I know of one family that all bought canvases, for painting, and they took a painting class.
Sip and dip.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, and these were all high school. These were late high school, early college kids. So the stretch for creativity was hard. And jigsaw puzzles, 1,000-piece puzzles with a family.
You want to take the try there, Harry?
Sure. So, kindness, we all talk about it, but now more than ever, just being so close and how we can really demonstrate respect and kindness and understanding, and through our words and through our actions. I think it's just so important, and to appreciate the cohesiveness that we can have with our family, and I think expressing our gratitude for what we do have as well.
And knowing that it's hard to always be kind as a parent, remember that sometimes being kind in your family means taking a step out. That if you need to take some time away, you need to go out for a run, because that will help you rethink, maintain some gratitude, proceed in your family with kindness. Take the time that you need.
And I think when we see our children being unkind and rude, we've heard a bit of that going on, take that more of what is the meaning of that? Why are they doing that? What is that about? And how do I support them in shifting that? There's a lot of discharge that I think kids are laying out there in the world, and that's part of their processing too, and not knowing where to go with it. And so not taking it too personally, and really think about what's the meaning behind that, and how do I support my child in shifting their thinking and feeling, and what is it that we can do to make some changes. A parent talked to me about realizing that maybe when they're getting all of that, that's when they need to lean in. And that may be the time when their child really needs compassion and a hug, not for you to escalate with them or keep it going.
And when you blow your top, this is a great time to learn how to apologize.
Yes.
It's not just that perhaps you're just doing the right thing, but that it's also you're setting a model. So when kids who may have a lot harder time maintaining their composure, when they blow at their top, they've now got a model in you, and they know how to apologize. Don't worry about spoiling your kids if they're sick. That idea of developmental regression, when kids are under severe stress, that they slide backwards in maturity, your kids may look a lot needier. They also, if they're getting sick or have any other chronic illness issues or chronic pain or special health care needs, you may see more of their distress showing up somatically in their body as illness. And this is really a time for reassurance. It's not a time for trying to make the standards that you might have had for them. And so if they're more whiny, even adolescents, more whiny, more cranky, more irritable, think of that as communication, and don't worry about spoiling. A little TLC goes a long way.
This next one, the organized, predictable, consistent check-ins, whether or not we're in this remote situation, I think that is so essential. And I think this is an opportunity to shift to that coach consultant model as the parent, rather than dictating what children need to do, but really thinking about how do we help them? These are your disciples. How do we give them the sense that they can build that self-discipline, talking to them and coaching them? What's your approach going to be to this project? If you're at this place with all these assignments, what do you think would be a next step? And helping inform them of what the possibilities are and working with them to choose one that really fits. So it's not a time to scrutinize them. Chris and I are in this Healthy Youth Initiative meeting, and this one incredible young high schooler was talking about the challenge she's having, that all her parents do is talk to her about her grades now. They used to talk about her music, her sport, all her things, and all the conversation now is about her grades. So how can we, if we do have these check-ins, make it about, hey, what's the plan for dinner? What do you need? Do we need to go get an Instapot, right? I mean, what are we going to do to keep things interesting, right? I have a young person that comes to some of our social gatherings. He's gotten into photography. And it's a new thing. He bought a camera at the thrift shop the one day it's open during the week, but he got this great camera and he's just so into it. So supporting your child and following what their interests are. And it may not be as engaged in school as it was, but if they have an interest, now is the time to support that creative outlet and let them explore that.
I think giving your kids choices instead of mandating or dictating. They may not like the choices, but at least they have a choice or a voice in that process. And that can be empowering to young people and give them a sense of autonomy and some sense of mastery or some control in their lives. The other one is praise. I think sometimes we spend a lot of energy trying to catch when kids are doing something wrong, but I like to flip the script and try to catch your kid doing something right and reward or praise them for that. Because too often I think kids feel like they're underappreciated when they are doing a good thing, that they aren't acknowledged for that. And it's just when somebody steps out of line or needs a correction that we spend energy there. And then lastly, I know this is a hot button about screen time, but really encouraging social interactions within whatever the particular guidelines are. And that's probably going to involve screens for a while, but it's helpful. Kids need that social interaction. They need that connection. And for the time being, this is where we're at. Other thoughts, Harry and Julie?
But bike riding, swimming, skiing, walking, running, all of those can be done with their peers, and they can all be done with the family too. So, thinking about where can you be 6 feet apart and safe?
Yeah. And there are opportunities for that online thing to be manageable and contained. We had a leadership crew hosted an Among Us activity. We had 160 kids showed up for it during lunch to play Among Us. And then put it all into different breakout groups. I did survive one game. I topped it. That was a real accomplishment.
What do they say? Old age and treachery will outduel youth and vigor. Is that
there we go. There's some hope. Okay. So this next one is for parents and caregivers, and just reminders to ourselves to be regular in our schedule, to eat healthy, nourishing meals, to manage our sleep. I mean, I don't think I've ever woken up so many nights at 3 a.m. and then not to get on my phone, not to start doing some work, but to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Avoiding that screen time for all of us, about an hour before bed that Julie was talking about. That blue light tricks our brain, thinks it's still daytime, and we get out of rhythm. So do that. We need to exercise when we can. I'm kind of a junkie for that. I need my exercise, and I feel the difference, and we know what happens to our kids. But do that moment with Millsap with your child, or that Go Sally Go. Those lunges were brutal. I was happy to see that. I was happy to see those kids having as hard time as I was. So, but,
I like to see you walking down the stairs the next day.
And while the gyms are closed, the pools are open. So lap swimming right now is a real treat.
I got to find out where you're going. My wife wants to know.
Yeah.
And, engage with spiritual practices that fit for your family. And they may be formal or they may be informal. But
Mhm.
that's another thing that comes from DBT is how do we support our kids in finding meaning in the world right now? Yeah, there's a lot of sense of hopelessness and helplessness, but there are some incredible things also happening. And tying into that sense of, as we talked about, the future and how we have a sense of purpose in our own life. So,
Even particularly right now, as we hit all of the winter holidays,
yeah.
this is a great time to be thinking about how do we care for one another and all of those who are really impacted economically around basic needs of food and shelter. And this is a great opportunity for young people to be thinking about how they might contribute, how a family might rethink their gift giving this year. Instead of bombarding Amazon, maybe there's a way to think about, especially with kids, what causes they might be interested in, and being aware as a family about where you might have an opportunity for that in your spiritual community, or if that's not part of your normal life, anywhere in the social services world. There are some really important drives right now for food and clothing because of the economic toll of the pandemic. And again, it creates meaning and it gives agency.
Well, and all of these things we're talking about can be discussion launch points for your family meetings.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do for the holidays? What are they going to be like? Don't let that holiday sneak up on you without planning, because I can guarantee it'll be frustrating. But
Mm-hmm.
think ahead, that coping ahead. What do we want to see happen this year? What can we do? How are we going to connect? Are we going to do Zoom games like Chris is talking about? What's that? We had one of the most relaxing Thanksgivings ever, right? Because we weren't setting a table for 20 people. And we
I
could
can't tell you how many families I heard, all of us hate turkey, and people got so much more creative this year
yeah,
on the kids helping contribute to what's the menu going to be and how do we make it fun.
right. I'm going to go to this. Well, I don't want to have missed that, but check in with your partner if you're in a relationship. Make sure you're communicating. It's amazing when we're, as the adults, when we can shift our behavior, you'll see it, your children's behavior shift. And this is really the last slide, other than resources, and we can maybe look at this. We've talked a lot about this already.
Mm-hmm.
The sleep schedule, opportunities for exercise. Yeah, we've really gone through.
I think so.
We got all over those.
Yep, I think we did.
A little Q&A time, or what do you want to do, Harry?
Yeah, I think it's time for Q&A.
Do you have those? Do you have a slide with the apps on it before we do Q&A?
I'll show that. Yeah, so this My Life, where it was called Stop, Breathe, Think. They keep adjusting it, but that's available on kids, middle schoolers' iPads. There are a couple different ones. There's also one I forgot. Oh, I didn't put it on here, but it's called Virtual Hope Box. And it was actually created by the Department of Defense for veterans, but it has all these different things, puzzles, calming down strategies, meditation apps on there. So that's a great one, and kids have it on their iPads. These other ones are real common ones. I hear people talking about Headspace, Calm, Liberate, meditation. And then this link, Behavioral Health Toolbox for Families. That's the Department of Health brochure and report that has all this information that we've been sharing with you tonight. And Michelle will make this available to everybody.
Yes, we will send out the entire slide deck as well as resources and the recording for those of you who want to share out or just to review the information. One question we did have from a participant is a little unique. So we've got people who are missing their friends because they're not seeing it at school. And then we have some kids who are new to the school and haven't even been able to make those connections. So what suggestions do you have for a new student who is a middle schooler, is very shy and doesn't know anyone, and has found it really hard to make friends? So what would you suggest for connections? The parent is worried it's going to be even harder to make friends when they return to school.
Well, I would say, well, we have these amazing girls groups going on, led by our counseling team that are heavily attended. And if we know it's a new person, they can support that new person and easing into the group in a way where they feel very comfortable. I have my lunch group, Mad Monday, named by kids years and years ago. But boy, if they are so welcoming. It's a group primarily of sixth graders, and they are just the most welcoming crew and are so happy to be together. And we're sharing pets, we're playing instruments, they're talking about Minecraft, they're, we're doing everything but make the popcorn that I used to make in my office and pass out. But
Virtual popcorn.
those are a couple. There's the Just group if they have an interest in social justice issues. I would recommend that you call the school counselor that's your child's counselor, or connect with me, and we'll think about what would be a good fit for that child.
I know Lori had a few questions she was going to share. Lori, do you want to jump
Sure.
in?
Yes, I will. So the questions that I've seen come through, and please feel free if anyone wants to now add your questions to the chat, either to Michelle and me directly or to everyone, and we'll try and get to as many as we can at this point. There's two questions here. They both relate to the level of homework that parents are seeing their students assigned at the high school in particular. There's just questions about whether or not the teachers, and I don't know if this is something you can answer, but maybe there's some insight from the high school counselors about what they hear during staff meetings and what the conversations are among teachers in this regard. It's just, they're talking about both the amount and the short time frames for some of the homework. I see this in my daughter, getting an assignment Friday morning that's due Friday night. And the same thing with assessments, that they feel like, I guess the question is there grace that can be given, and how can parents help their kids through that, I guess, struggle that they're going through with the amount of homework and testing and just the new normal of having to be online all day and needing those breaks.
I think probably the best place to start would be with the teacher themselves and see if there's some flexibility there. Also looping in the alpha counselor. And there can be, depending on the circumstance, sometimes an ability to accommodate, I guess the way I would put it, where young people that are dug themselves a hole with homework and assignments, maybe there's a way to focus on some key themes or some key projects within that particular class, and there is a possibility for some flexibility there. But I think communicating and letting the teacher know that, hey, I'm drowning, I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's not that I'm a poor student or that I'm somehow not taking this seriously. It's just the sheer volume of it. And maybe your kid's isn't adapting to the virtual learning, and there's struggles there. So starting with that communication and looping in the guidance counselor, I think would be a good first step.
I want to support this idea you hear Harry using about being the coach consultant model for adolescents. This is a great time for young people to learn how to speak up and advocate for themselves. So they go to the teacher and they have you as a parent in their corner as a coach, as a collaborator, as a mentor for how do you speak up when something's not working for you, and how do you solve problems, rather than parents managing it exclusively.
Eloquently put. That's what I meant. Next question.
I think
I knew that.
I was just going to add a good strategy of that I can't remember what speaker I heard said this, but they said, before you do anything, ask your child what they want you to do. Sometimes they just want you to listen. Sometimes they want your advice. Sometimes they want you to help work through the problem. And sometimes they don't want you to do anything. So I think that's important too. I thought that was a very good takeaway of really trying to understand how do they want you to be involved, and they don't necessarily want you just to jump in and call the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, Michelle, I'd say I also learned a strategy that's been really working with my teen, which is letting her know that we don't hold that expectation for her. So taking that pressure off of her, saying, we know you'll do your best, just do the best that you can. This isn't going to define the rest of your life. And just trying to be that voice of counter to probably the voice that is running through her head. And so parents, we may not have the ability to change the way that teachers are assigning homework, but we do have that control to help our kids know that pressure isn't on them from us.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat.
Yes.
Someone in the
yes,
chat had actually
yes.
said, someone in the chat had actually said it might be better if the teachers provide that message because our kids don't always want to hear it from us. But if another parent or a teacher says that same message, they may hear it differently. So I don't know how we, encourage our teachers to also let students know.
Mhm.
And I've had to tell my kids, I used to say, just do your best. And I thought, I think I read an article that said, as adults, we don't do our best at everything. We choose when something's important, we do our best. But if it's something where you're just making a collage so that people can get to know you, you don't have to spend 6 hours on it because that's not the intention of it. And so I think that's also helpful to remember too, is pick and choose what's important.
Mhm.
Well, it's interesting in this advisory from the Department of Health, there's a whole section for teachers. And I'm going to be sharing, I just got this last week, and I'm going to be sharing it with our administrators this week. And I think we need to have some compassion for our teachers too. I was just looking up at the daily schedule, and they're only seeing in the middle school, they're only seeing their core students 3 times a week.
Mhm.
And one of those days is 35 minutes. And so they have the mandate to get a certain amount of instruction in. And I think it's an incredible challenge for them as well. So we have to find a way to not make everyone feel worse and come out of this thing feeling intact. And I think our teachers need some support from our administrators, and I think they need some information too on how this is impacting all of us.
We've created
I'll be sharing that.
We've created some systems at the high school to be able to track kids that are struggling. They look at attendance, they look at participation. Anybody that got a D or an F at the quarter, people are reaching out to them. We have an attendance coordinator, and so she's making personal, reaching out to kids and families personally and making plans or accommodations or coming up with strategies to get kids to log on more frequently. So yeah, it's happening, and it's a priority at the high school to make sure that kids aren't getting lost out there in Zoom land somewhere.
One of the other questions was regarding a comment I think that you all had talked about is looking to the future and planning for the future. And so this parent says, I have a 13-year-old who had social anxiety prior to COVID. What are the recommendations for assisting kids like this to look ahead with a positive mindset to in-person social interactions?
Oh, this is
multi-layered.
This has been such an interesting phenomenon. There's a group of kids that we've all been talking about as clinicians and educators who are actually getting some relief by online schooling. And it's the kids who are socially anxious or with general anxiety. And that there are some kids who are actually saying, oh my gosh, I can learn so much better because they're not overwhelmed by all of the social demands or the sensory onslaught of being in a big school. And I think helping that be okay. And so acknowledging that, yeah, it could get more difficult when you go back. The other piece that I'm hearing from teens and adults is I'm worried this is changing me forever. You know, am I going to come out of this agoraphobic? Teens are saying that. Am I going to come out of this antisocial? So I think helping kids stay grounded in, you know, you are who you are, and all of us are having some kind of strange thoughts about how this might impact us. And so it may take some practice, and for kids who are socially anxious, it may feel awkward when you go back. It's like a skill, and some of us have kind of lost our social muscle skill. And so being, I think, upfront about that.
Let's see.
Oh, I want to add one more thing that a teenager helped me realize. She was saying, this is that freshman. She was saying, we had talked because she's very socially anxious. And we were talking about how the summer between 8th and 9th grade is often a really transformative time in a person's identity. And sometimes you leave middle school one person and you really decide an intentional, like, I think I want to do this differently freshman, and you see a big leap in identity development. for kids. And some anxious kids in particular are using this time for that. And as parents, you can encourage that. This is a time to kind of rethink, how do you want to show up at school? How do you want to show up with your friends? You can redecide how you want to do things.
I think that was one of the questions I have, because thinking about coming from middle school to high school, there's that whole social element of relationships and dating, and missing that whole freshman year, wondering what that's going to do all of a sudden when you're thrown in as a sophomore, instead of having that awkward freshman year where you're supposed to be not knowing what's going on. So it'll be interesting to see if that delays this group in any way, trying to figure out that whole social piece of their life, because there aren't football games where you mingle with people that you might be interested in, or so will be an interesting thing to look at in the future.
Another freshman was sharing, she's very socially anxious, but she was saying that, so much of how she makes friends in the world is an introverted or more anxious person observes, and that's how they pick up all their cues. And so all those group gatherings where you don't have to interact, the football game, the classroom, the assembly, the hall, the lunchroom, the before and after, the passing periods, those are observational moments that attentive, sensitive, anxious, shy, more introverted kids use. Like, those are active practicing, taking in data, and then deciding how they can show up socially, that they're losing. And I think being upfront about, you didn't get this period to do this, will help them make sense of, like, why do I feel extra anxious, or why do I feel extra awkward?
I was going to share, if I could, quickly, at Youth and Family Services on our outpatient side, we get a lot of calls from parents these days, really just asking, in the midst of COVID and everything else, this is so confusing. I used to think I had a good sense of when my kid needed to see a counselor, but I just don't know. And I wonder, Julie, Harry, Chris, what would you say that are some guiding principles, I guess, for parents about really, when you should call one of us and call in to get some support?
Carrie, Chris, you want to take it first?
Yeah, I start to think about when young people aren't able to do the tasks that they really need to do. And when their emotions, they're unable to regulate their emotions on a daily basis, or it's so many times a week that it's really disrupting the rhythm of your entire family. And thinking about how do you respond to that? And I've had several calls from parents asking just that. And we'll talk through some strategies that potentially could shift things, but may not. And if they don't shift, that's the time potentially for a second call and some engagement of support. And it may be 1 or 2 meetings with me, and then to maybe a referral to someone like Julie as a private practitioner, or it may be an ongoing relationship with someone at Mercer Island Youth and Family Services, or it may be being part of, I do 2 groups for emotional regulation, 2 DBT Steps A groups, one for boys and one for girls. I'm doing those on an ongoing basis, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that can be a place where kids can begin to learn and be with peers, learning about these skills, talking about these things, hearing how other people are dealing with it. We have 2 resiliency groups going, and they'll be going again at school. So there are different levels of support that can potentially meet those needs. But if your family is going through a significant transition, if you are feeling overwhelmed as well, please reach out and check in with myself. Audrey Phillips is an intern working with me. Jana Dash, Drew Klein, Janet Goldstein, amazing counselors at the middle school, our team at the elementaries, our team at the high school, Ariel and Chris are your school guidance counselors, and they can help you really sort out what's an appropriate next level of response. Julie?
I would say, as an adolescent, oh, sorry, Lori.
Well, I was just going to interject. We had a question just before Harry is done. Would it be possible to conduct a DBT training for MIH students for the high school as well?
So it's in the works for second semester. Ariel and I are, I think we're going to be doing a group. It's in the works. So yes. I was just going to say, in response to Derek's question, part of adolescence is making mistakes and learning from them, coming back to center. But if your kid is continuing to make mistakes, they're engaging in behavior that's out of character, that's illegal, that's dangerous, that's immoral, and that pattern continues, that would be another red flag that you would want to reach out and consult with people like Harry or I or Ariel or any of the guidance counselors to kind of figure out what those next steps are.
I think Chris is making a really important point, which is if you're an anxious parent, it's okay for your kid to be out of sorts for a little while, and make some space for everybody to be a little out of sorts. So as soon as they look a smidge out of sorts, you don't need to jump into a heavy duty intervention. But when somebody's patterns or capacity to cope or capacity to function is way off kilter from who you know your child to be, then it's time to be reaching out to school counselors and also to other supportive adults, the extended family, the other people, the youth group, other people that your child would normally be getting support from. And the other thing is ask directly, particularly high schoolers. They will tell you, ask directly, are you so lonely and isolated that you're starting to feel depressed, or you're starting to have strange thoughts? What kinds of worries are you having? Do you feel like you're worrying more than before the pandemic? They will tell you, and they actually want to talk to you as their parents more than they want to talk to any of us. It's okay to ask directly.
Absolutely. I think that's so essential. And if you're hearing things like, I don't want to be around anymore, I wish I'd be better off, you'd be better off if I wasn't here. Hopelessness, helplessness, we need to respond to that. And if children are saying that they don't want to live anymore, any statements of suicidality or ideation, you need to take that very seriously, respond to that. And we need to help them find other ways to express their despair, but also to make sure that they know that that is not an answer, that's not a solution for them, because their conception of what death may be isn't what ours is. And so really getting them that support, acknowledging that, the mean age of suicidal ideation and attempts is now 13 years old. So I think we need to really take to heart, if we're hearing those messages, call a professional, call us, let's talk through that, and let's get your child the support they need so they can get to a place where they feel good about themselves and their place in the world.
And I guess I just want to give a plug for Youth and Family Services. We have this cool partnership between the school district and the agency, but it is confidential. So if you call Harry or I or Ariel, any of our MIYFS school-based counselors, we can do that private confidential consultation. Sometimes it can be helpful to involve schools, and with your permission, with your child or young person's permission, then we can collaborate or coordinate. But the initial conversation or consultation is confidential with us.
And I was going to mention a couple of weeks ago, we offered the Youth Suicide Prevention for Parents program, which is just really great training. And that is in coordination with University of Washington Forefront program. And UW does have a training program online, and I'll be sure to include that in the links for those of you who might be interested in doing that online training. It's a really great program that just gives you the words to know how to ask your child if they are thinking of harming themselves. And so a really great resource.
Thank you, Michelle.
Any other questions that we haven't addressed, or that anyone? We're getting lots of thank yous. So give a few more minutes if anyone has any other questions.
I was just going to share an anecdote of something that I thought was really great. I saw some questions about how it may be harder to foster those social interactions once the kids get older. I know that I've seen that firsthand with my own daughter at the high school. Like, some of the things that they try and do just flop so hard. And I feel for the teachers, and the kids just aren't into it. But one of the things that I feel like the high school is really put a lot of energy into is trying to transfer the clubs to online spaces. And oh my gosh, you guys, my daughter's a junior. I pushed her since 9th grade to join a club. She would not do it. And I forced her to join a club this year. So of course she joined like the easiest one, which is the art club, but it's been so lovely. And it's like once every 2 weeks, she doesn't even turn her camera on, but she makes art, they listen to music, and it's just been a way for her to have some, I guess, downtime and connection to other kids. So I would say, take advantage of what the school does have to offer. And I just feel like I've been really pleased that it's there.
That's
Right.
great. I love hearing that.
Well, I'm so glad you said, because we have a Sources of Strength Club, and I'd be remiss if I didn't put a plug in for that as the co-advisor. And that's a great place. But that's just it's such a great way for kids to have that social interaction, to contribute and have fun and really make a difference in our school community, whether it's that or even the art club or all these different things. Take a look at the activity list on on the school website. And you can tell your child, you don't have to do them all, but you need to do something, right? That is a proper use of parental authority. You're going to get involved in one club and pick what it is, or one activity, right? That's really okay. But you get to choose, but you have to pick one.
It's that choices thing. You might not like the choices, but you have a choice.
Right.
Love it.
Any other questions that we might have? I know you've all had a long day, so we want to thank you all for coming. If any of you also happen to have younger kids at home, tomorrow night we have a program for preschool to first grade parents who might be having some challenges with that age group, totally different developmental stage, but challenges and opportunities as well. So we'd invite you to join us for that. But thank you again to all of our panelists, to MIYFS for partnering with us, Julie for being here with us and sharing your wisdom, and it's just so reassuring to see familiar faces and knowing that we can call our counselors in our schools. We're so lucky to have you all in our community. There was one last minute question, if we have just 1 second. The question is about the changing relationships between parents and children, that children are seeing sides of us they've never seen, and we're seeing parts of them that we've never seen. Are they in this, and they are in the same boat? How can we address this with our kids in an honest way? I can vouch for that my kids have seen me very stressed and trying to apologize and explain that after what's going on, and letting them know this is the first time I've been through a pandemic as well. So any suggestions about that?
I would love to hear from our psychoanalytic partner here.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah, this happens. It's going to happen. I mean, one could think of it as that's a source of greater closeness and connection when I know more of you and you know more of me. But what that also creates, as you're noting, Michelle, and Harry noted, is lots of opportunities to apologize. Lots of opportunities for deeper understanding and a potential actually for more closeness. And when that's not happening, when things are escalating, the skill to have in your back pocket is practice separating, practice de-escalation. Asking teens and middle schoolers and their parents to be in the same space 24/7 requires a lot of capacity to ignore, to step away, to de-escalate.
I use the term taking space. And it
Yep.
comes from an old anger management group I would do. And I have kids and parents agree that they will allow one another to take space.
Yeah.
You think about cortisol and adrenaline, when we escalate, take about 15, at least 20 minutes or so
Yep.
to flow through our bloodstream, maybe even longer for some people. So we're not going to problem solve anything when we're escalated.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happens, you need to recognize that as a parent. You need to take a breath and tag team with your partner if you have one, or just step away and say, I need to take some space. We need a break. And you need to create that opportunity in your home, especially with our adolescents and our teens, and let them, because that's one of the complaints I hear from kids. They keep pursuing me. I keep asking if I could just calm down, but it won't stop. And it might be your child pursuing you. I hear that too. So creating those ground rules, another good topic for that family meeting on Sundays.
Yes. Yes.
Picking
Well,
your
I think that-
battles too. I think it's hard not to engage when a kid drops a choice word on you or slams the door off the hinges.
Yeah.
You want to react to that, but trying to, in the moment, take those breaths, step back, and choose the battle, or re-engage at a later time.
Yes.
pause, and come back to it when you're of
Yes.
a different.
Part of taking space is agreeing to come back and work on the problem.
Yeah.
You might only be able to do it for about 30 seconds to take more space, but that's a better cycle than continued escalation, holes in walls,
Yes.
frustration, which leads to all kinds of other problems.
Well, I think on the other end too, our kids are seeing us more anxious and maybe sad or scared. We're trying to reassure them that everything's okay, but the message that they're seeing on our face is not composure. And I think there have been moments where we've all thought, how long can this go and how bad is it going to get? And we can choose to hide that from our kids or be honest. And either way is hard. So I think that's part of it too.
And
When
as
kids are
much as
seeing
you-
us in a light.
As much as you can, especially with older kids, get more comfortable as much as you can with a bias towards honesty. Little kids can read the difference between words and faces, but big kids really can. I mean, adolescents are watching us for congruence all the time. And I think sometimes, to other life-altering big world events, and think about our ancestors who went through war or immigration or the Depression, and that this is an opportunity. When I hear some of the elders in my life tell stories, they can say, well, because of this, this is what we've learned. And we are in this weird time where we are teaching our kids, how do you deal with hardship? And part of hardship is acknowledging it's sad. There have been many very significant losses for families in our community, both of loved ones, of health, of economic stability, and being real about that. And what do we do to keep moving forward? We're not acknowledging the hard stuff to stay stuck there. We're acknowledging it so that we're free to solve problems, think creatively, look to the future, and use each other. Rely on each other, rely on the people you love and who love you.
And I think that's a perfect place to end it. Thank you all once again for taking time out of your evening. Thank you. Whoops, someone chime in there, sorry. And thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a wonderful evening, and hopefully we all feel a little lighter, at least for the evening. So thank you all.
Thanks so much.